Hi bakers! Who loves cheesecake? That's right, all of you do. It's scientifically proven that cheesecake is amazing. So, we're gonna make cheesecake today, and I'm super excited. So I've already gotten all of my ingredients ready for the batter. So I have a couple of little things to show you first before I get started. And the first part is part of our mise en place, and that's getting the pan ready. So I'm gonna bring you down here. Hold still. Here we go. So you can see what I'm working with. All right. So this pan is called a springform pan. So there's two parts, the sides and then the bottom. And then there's this latch here. If I let it go, it'll get a little bit wider and then the base will pop out. Now this is really, really nifty for later on when we're trying to get our cheesecake out. That does not mean that you have to have this style pan for making cheesecake. I've done them in regular cake pans many, many times. It's a little bit harder to get out, but it's definitely not impossible, and we'll talk about that later when I'm taking them out later, way later in the video. But this is nice to have. A lot of professionals have it. I will say they tend to be a little flimsier. As you can see, it's really easy to bend. So while it is a little easier to get your cheesecake out, they're not always as sturdy as like a legit cake pan. I will say in the industry, I usually use cake pans for that reason, and also because I already needed cake pans for cakes. So I have two things for the same piece. Two things when you can only have one thing, because everybody knows we run out of storage space. So, but I do want to show you what a springform pan looks like. So I'm going to reassemble it. So I'm going to put this plate back in here. I'm going to line it up into this ridge, just like that. Snap it closed, and it shouldn't come out. Cool. I am going to line the bottom with parchment. That's just going to make life a lot easier when I try to get it out. There's no need to grease this pan. Sometimes I'll put a little grease in just to keep the parchment from moving when I put the crust in. It just makes it a little bit easier. But you don't have to put anything, and you definitely do not want to put anything on the side. Some people will line it with parchment. That's okay. I find it's usually a little less clean. So, actually, I'm going to take it back part. I'm going to cut a circle out of my parchment that I can use. So I'm going to take the base and I'm just going to draw a circle around it. If you were using a cake pan, you would just use the bottom of that cake pan. Now the circle that I drew is slightly bigger, so if you can see, there's kind of a rim here, so my circle line is here. So when I cut it, I'm actually going to cut just inside so that the parchment will lay flat on the bottom. Take it, and I'll cut it real quick, and you can see that I'm going, well, maybe you can see, I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up, but I'm going just a little bit on the inside of the line, so when I'm done, hopefully it'll sit nice and flat. If it's not quite flat, I'll probably trim a little bit just to make sure it sits flat, because it's going to make our base a little bit more even and perfecter. So not quite, I need to take a little bit off here. Much easier to take a little bit off than to put it back, right? Almost so close. One more pass. There it is. So you can see now that the parchment sits nice and flat. It's exactly what I'm looking for. So I can assemble my pan back together. And I might just actually, that's right, I don't have pan spray. Pause. So when I go to put in the crust, it's going to make life a little bit easier if I stick a little butter or pan spray in the bottom, then stick my parchment down, so this way it's not really going to move as much as if it was just loose. Great, so my pan's pretty much ready to go. One last little step which is incredibly important if you're using a springform pan. If you're using a cake pan, this step is not important. In fact, it would be wasteful. But because this is two separate pieces, there's not a perfect seal. Later, we're going to put this into a water bath, and if we just put it in like this, we risk having water get in and make the crust really soggy and possibly get water into the filling and or the batter, and that would be not very nice, and it wouldn't set up very well, and it'd be water and it'd be gross. So I'm going to line the bottom with aluminum foil. It's actually, again, another reason why I typically will use a cake pan when I do cheesecake or when I did cheesecake in the industry. But I do want to show you because this is a widely used pan. So I take my aluminum foil and I'm going to wrap it up the sides. At least 2 inches high so I can make sure no water is going to get in there. And you can see that this isn't quite high enough. So my aluminum foil is not quite wide enough for what I need, so I'm just going to take a second piece. And it went this way this time, so I'm going to rotate it so I can cover up my short ends. And I want to really push it, try to make it nice and tight. So that's going to help prevent any water from getting in. In a perfect world, we'd have a nice big wide saran wrap, or not saran wrap, aluminum foil, so that wouldn't happen. But that's more the industrial size aluminum foil, which I'm assuming you guys don't have in your house. I obviously don't have in my house. It's hard to find that extra wide aluminum foil. So my pan is ready to go. So I can set it over here. And now I'm going to talk about the crust. So very similar to when we made our Oreo crusts. We're going to have a cookie. This is very traditional, so this is a graham cracker. But you could do Oreo. You could do any kind of hard cookie that you want to do. Oh, look, my oven's ready. Doesn't really matter, so I'm going to need to take this and crush it. There's lots of ways that you can do it. You can do it in a food processor. You could do it in a blender. You could put it in a plastic bag and beat it with something, you know, like a rolling pin or another a pot or a pan or, you know, your fist if you're really angry. But you do want to get these in crumbs, so I'm going to do that here in a second. I got a little sugar in this one. You don't have to add sugar to graham cracker crust, but this cheesecake I find just it's really nice with a little bit of sugar and then butter, which I need to melt, and then I'm going to combine it all together. You could add some spices to this if you wanted to, like cinnamon might be really nice or whatever. I'm going to make a pretty kind of standard cheesecake, so then when I add toppings to it, I can have fun with the toppings. So I'm going to leave it just like this. So I'm going to get these crushed and I'm going to get this butter melted. Okay, so I don't have a food processor, but I do have a blender. So I'm going to put my graham crackers into my blender. I'm going to break them up in a little bit smaller pieces just to make the process a little faster and be a little easier on my blender, and then I can fit a couple more in. I'll probably do it in smaller batches just because our blender can't handle quite as much as a food processor can. That's about half. And I don't know about you, but I lost this top a long time ago, so I'm going to keep my hand on top so I don't get graham cracker crumbs everywhere. Alright, so that goes pretty quick. Looks like I still have a couple of big chunks, but I want it to be mostly fine. I don't want big pieces, so I'm going to let this go a little bit longer, and then I'll do my next batch, and then I'll be ready to go. Okay, so my graham cracker crumbs are all ready. So I got my sugar, and I just melted my butter. You can see there's still a little bit of pieces in there, and I kind of want to do that on purpose. I don't want to melt it till it's like crazy boiling hot because I'm going to mix this with my hands. And if I made this butter crazy boiling hot, well then I would burn my hands. So I took it out just before it was completely melted, and then I'm just going to stir real quick and just let the residual heat melt the last little bit of the butter. When I don't see any chunks, I can mix it all in. So in the meantime, I'll add my sugar in. Ooh, can I multitask? Can I do two things at once? I guess I can. That's not too bad. Alright, so So my sugar and my graham crackers all mixed together. So I'm gonna add my butter in. So hopefully you remember, same exact method as when we made the Oreo crust for our chocolate mousse pie. Same thing, get there in there with our hands and mix it together. Sometimes it's fun just to mix stuff with your hands, I think. All right, so it looks like it's all pretty incorporated. So we need to check and see if this is mixed well enough. Now, we can afford for our graham cracker crust for our cheesecake to be a little drier than we could with our chocolate mousse pie. So our pie had sides and it needed to be able to hold its shape. So it needed to be a little stronger. Our cheesecake today, we're just gonna make a bottom crust, so it's not really gonna have to hold itself up. So we do need it to be, you know, fairly wet, but we also don't wanna make it too wet because then it can feel a little bit dense. So I'm gonna do my test where I put it in my hand and I'm gonna squeeze, and if I release, it should hold its shape. And that looks perfect. So it's a little bit drier than we made our Oreo crust, but it's still gonna hold its shape, which is exactly what we need. And it kind of looks like a lot right now for how much goes in the pan, but you'll see as soon as we smoosh it down, it's actually not that much. So my pan's all ready with my parchment in there, and it's stuck down so it's not gonna move. So I'm gonna dump all of my crust into my springform pan. And again, it looks like a lot right now, but it won't. So before I start pushing down hard, I wanna make sure I spread it evenly first. It's a lot easier to spread it even when it's loose, so it gets a lot harder. So kind of smoothing with this hand and turning with this hand helps me get a little bit even. I'm just keeping this hand level while I turn, and that's gonna help give me pretty flat, even distribution. And now I'm gonna push down. So you can do a lot of things. You can just use your fingers. You can use like a measuring cup or something with a flat bottom to help you. So like I could use this to kind of push down. My hands are already pretty dirty, so I'm just gonna get in there with my hands. But you can see that if you use your hands, you kind of get a little bit more divots because, well, our hands aren't flat, right? But I'm not worried about it. Not today. Just a little bit of extra time, I can still make it pretty flat. Trying to use kind of this portion of my finger this way to kind of get into the corners. So it's nice and flat and even and nice and compressed. Pretty important that it's compressed. It's gonna help later for our crust to stay together. All right. Crust is ready to go, so I can just set it aside, and now it's time to make the cheesecake batter. All right, so it's time to make the cheesecake batter. When we're mixing this batter, the number one thing that we want to think about is not incorporating any air. Now, are you going to incorporate some air? Yes, but the least air we can incorporate, the better, because what will happen is if we incorporate a lot of air, it'll expand, right? Because hot things expand, so the air, when it goes in the oven, it'll expand. Now with things that have flour in it, like cakes and muffins, things like that, that air expands and then the gluten sets, and then it keeps that air pocket exactly where it needs to be, and that's a great texture. Now cheesecake typically doesn't have flour. Some recipes have a little bit of flour, but a tablespoon or two, it's a pretty small amount. So there's not enough gluten to hold its shape. So if we add a lot of air into our cake batter, that air is going to expand, expand, expand. And then when our cheesecake starts to cool, it's going to contract. And what can happen and you can kind of see like a cheesecake might kind of dome up like that. If it domes up really, really high, well, there's no gluten to hold it in place. There's nothing really firm enough to hold it in place. So it's going to collapse on itself. And a lot of times it'll start to crack. So it's like, and then it kind of cracks. And if you've probably seen it, very common for a cracked cheesecake. That's one of the ways that you can get a cracked cheesecake is by incorporating air, too much air in your batter. So the first step to make sure we're not putting too much air in our batter is to start with soft cream cheese. So I have had this cream cheese sitting out at room temperature, so it's nice and cool, warm now. You can use the old blowtorch trick where you gently use a blowtorch on the side of your bowl, which will heat it up. You still risk incorporating air because you have to mix a little bit longer when you do that. So it's not really ideal. You can do that with butter and it's okay, but I would highly not recommend it with cream cheese. And you probably don't have blowtorches at home. I do because it's my favorite tool. But probably most of you don't have blowtorches, and even if you did, your parents probably just want you using a blowtorch anyway. So I'm gonna put this on and I'm gonna keep it on low. Very important, this whole process, you're gonna keep your mixer on a low speed. Again, not trying to incorporate air. So I'm gonna put it on low speed, just kind of get it mixed together for a little bit, and then we're gonna move on to the next ingredients. All right, so my cream cheese has been in my mixer for a little bit, and you can see there's a lot of kind of peaks forming. That's a good indication that it is nice and soft. And for me, the best indication is really just feeling it. So if I put my spatula in here and with very little pressure, I can move it around. That's a really great indication that we're nice and soft. I know that's kind of a hard thing to get across over video. But if you imagine like a cold cream cheese, if I was doing this with a cold cream cheese, I kind of have to like bite it a little bit. But this is really, really easy. Just a scrape, which is a great indicator. Another big thing that we're gonna do in this process is we're gonna scrape our bowl a ton. And you'll see as we go, this batter is gonna get liquidier and liquidier. So it's really, really important that every step we scrape our bowl the best you've ever scraped any bowl ever. So our next ingredient is gonna be our sugar. So I'm gonna get that added in. And again, on low speed, I'm gonna get it incorporated, and you're gonna see just that addition of sugar is gonna make this a little thinner. And again, I buy organic sugar, so that's the only reason why it's got a little bit of brown tinge. Regular white granulated sugar is exactly what you would use for this. So can you see how much that texture has changed? It's gotten so much looser, so much softer. So we definitely want to make sure our sugar is getting dissolved with that organic sugar that I buy. It takes a little bit longer, which isn't ideal, but that's what I have in my house, so that's what I'm going to work with. But I can see the crystals are kind of going away, which is a really great sign. I'm going to stop it, scrape it, and let it go a little bit more. Okay, so I've mixed it one more time, and you can see it's definitely softer than it was before I added the sugar. So I'm gonna scrape it one more time really, really well, make sure I get everything off. So the rest of our ingredients are basically all liquid, so it's gonna get thinner and thinner as we go. So if we have any chunks of unmixed cream cheese, they're gonna remain chunks. And if they remain chunks, that's gonna lead to a really chunky cheesecake, which is not really what we want. We want it to be nice and smooth and creamy. So like the most important step right now is getting nice and scraped every little spot, which is harder than I thought it might be with a phone in my hand, trying to scrape and make sure it's looking at the camera. So I'm sorry for the really shaky footage. This is not as easy as I thought it might be. All right, so my bowl is all scraped and everything is nice and mixed together evenly. So I'm gonna add my next ingredient, which is heavy cream, which is a liquid. So that's gonna thin my batter down a lot. So I'm gonna do it again gradually, so that way I don't form any lumps. So I'm gonna add half of it. And my first addition, get it mixed in, about half. Get it mixed in, scrape the bowl again, really, really well. And then I'll add the second half. All right, so it was mixed in, I scraped it, and I let it mix some more, so now I'm gonna add the next round of heavy cream. And guess what I'm gonna do after that? I'm gonna scrape again. Scraping is so important when you make cheesecake. And if you think that this feels crazy, I want you to imagine when I used to work at JMU. Every Thursday at our dining hall, we had, it was like cheese day. So they had grilled cheese, tomato soup, and cheesecake every single Thursday. It was a huge student tradition. So naturally, we had to make a lot of cheesecake. I think we typically made about 10 to 14 full sheet pans of cheesecake. So to help kind of put that quantity in perspective, we typically would use, so this recipe uses a pound and 8 ounces of cream cheese. We typically used either 1 or 1.5 cases of cream cheese, which a case is 50 pounds. So if you can imagine, this scraping a little bit, that's not too hard. We were scraping like 100 pounds of batter at a time. People think that baking is dainty, but there is a lot of muscle that goes into big commercial baking, that is for sure. All right, so all scraped again, and now I'm gonna start adding my eggs. So I broke one, but that's okay, not a big deal. I want you to see these really pretty eggs. So can you see how really vibrant those yolks are? Aren't they so golden and awesome? So it's actually because these are eggs from my brother's chickens. He and his family have maybe 24 chickens that lay eggs. So what happens with industry kind of mass-produced eggs is they eat the same diet all the time, and their yolks end up being really, really pale. So when you get really, really fresh chicken eggs from chickens that have a really, really varied diet, their egg yolks are really, really vibrant, which actually leads to them being even tastier. They're more complex tasting and deliciouser. So my cheesecake batter may even have like a little bit more of a yellow tinge than, just a slight yellow tinge than a traditional cheesecake, but I'm all about it because that right there is more flavor and it's better for the environment. Thanks, Jake. Jake's my brother. All right, so I'm gonna add 1 egg at a time. Whoop. I'm gonna mix it, scrape the bowl, mix a little bit more, and then I'll add the next addition. Whoops. There it is. All right, so it's scraped, or mixed, scraped, mixed again, and now I'm adding my next egg. All right, so I'm actually gonna go in with 2 eggs this time. I can go a little faster now. It's getting a little bit liquidier. You can see it's already turning gold. I still got 3 more yolks to add, yay. And in goes this last egg. Same process as before. All right, guys, I hope you can really see this color because I'm kind of geeking out about it. I've actually never made a cheesecake with farm fresh eggs. My brother just started doing eggs, but it's so yellow. So typically cheesecake batter is pretty white, like barely off-white, but this is like a hint of gold. It's kind of special. I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to show pictures to my brother. But that means that this cheesecake is gonna be so rich and delicious. Oh my God, you guys. I'm so excited, and I'm really sad that you can't taste it here with me. All right, so I'm gonna combine my last 3 ingredients together before they go in the mixer. So my last 3 ingredients are, well, they're supposed to be half and half, but I didn't have half and half, so it was actually more heavy cream, sour cream, and vanilla. So sour cream may seem a little bit funny, but sour cream is, one, really, really creamy, but also really tangy. So everything that we've added so far has been pretty heavy, creamy. So adding that little bit of tang with the sour cream is actually gonna make it feel a little bit lighter. Instead of being crazy, crazy heavy, it's gonna basically kind of balance out our cheesecake, which is really, really great because we don't want it to just be like fat heaviness, because that can be a little exhausting to eat, just fatty fatness, which probably sounds delicious right now. But it's just gonna balance it out a little bit more. And obviously our vanilla is gonna add some flavor. You could add any kind of extract. You could also, if you wanted to do kind of a flavored cheesecake, you could add orange zest or lemon zest, different extracts, nut pastes, things like that could give it some flavor. Cocoa powder. or melted chocolate, as long as it's everything's room temperature. You can add melted chocolate. But again, today I'm just going for a plain vanilla cheesecake. Well, I shouldn't say plain vanilla, because vanilla is amazing, and it's not technically plain. That vanilla that I just put in, I actually got when I was in Mexico. So actually, it's special vanilla. You mix this together. It doesn't have to be perfectly mixed, but it just makes it a little bit more even to have the sour cream and the half and half and vanilla mixed together. So I'm gonna add this into batches, and again, I'm gonna add it, mix it for a little bit, scrape the bowl, all on low speed. So go ahead with the first half, and you see those little chunks, that's just sour cream. They didn't get quite mixed, so nothing wrong with that. Going in with my last addition now. I'm gonna scrape all that out. Ooh, that got blurry. There it is. I'm gonna mix it, scrape it, mix it, and that'll be our batter. So our batter is all done. It's nice and beautiful and creamy. So it's time to add it into our pan. So remember, we already got it lined with parchment, and then our crust, and then we have saran, or why do I keep saying saran wrap? Aluminum wrap around the sides. So I'm just gonna very gently, I don't wanna like shove it in because I don't wanna break up any of the crumbs that are down here. So I'm just gonna gently pour it in straight in the center, and it's gonna self-level. So, in we go. Doesn't that look delicious already? Very excited. I love cheesecake. Definitely want to make sure we get all of it because it's all delicious. If you found that you didn't scrape your bowl very well and there was a little like clump of cream cheese in the bottom, you'd actually want to leave it in the bowl though. So if you do see that, just leave it. And by the way, you don't have to do this with a stand mixer. You could definitely do this with a hand mixer. You can also do this by hand. It's certainly much harder to do by hand, but you totally could. Throughout this whole closure time, if you have any questions about how to make anything that we've in any of my videos or that we've made throughout the year and you don't have the equipment for, please reach out to me. I know lots and lots of tricks, and if I don't know them, I want to learn them, so I'll help you figure it out. All right, so you notice that I have this cheesecake in a deep dish, and that's because we're gonna fill the sides with water. So remember we said there's no flour in here, so the only thing that is setting this cheesecake is egg. And if it's a liquid that's set only by egg, what's that called? You're right, it's called a custard. So this is a custard, and when we bake a custard, so yes, this is a baked custard, most of the time we're gonna put it in a hot water bath, so that way it heats a little bit more gently. When our eggs cook at too high of a temperature, they start to get that like eggy taste, that scrambly egg taste, as well as kind of starts to get that little bit of a texture, and it becomes just not very pleasant. So if we put it in a water bath, that kind of protects the sides, so and everything we bake, it bakes from the outside in. So our outside is going to be set before our inside, so the water actually slows down the heating process from the sides. So we're going to add some warm water there. So I got my water warming. I'm actually going to scoot you to the side a little bit so I don't get any water. Now, it's actually a little easier to do this with the pan already in the oven. You can actually take and pull out the rack in your oven, or if it's like our ovens at school, you could just kind of set it on the edge and pour it in. But I don't really know how to get that on film. So I'm going to fill it here, and then I'm going to lift it like a princess very gently and evenly and hope that I don't spill any water. So I'm just going to add that in about halfway up my batter mixture. Now, because of this water bath, it's going to take longer to bake, but it's going to be a much more consistent cook all the way through, not like really, really hard on the outside and overcooked on the outside. It's going to be a lot better. So it's going to take a while to cook. So I'm going to get this in the oven, and when it's done, I'm going to show you how to check it. So I pulled the cheesecake out of the oven. I did get a couple air bubbles, but I'm not too worried about them. You can see this hole right in the center was actually from me taking its temperature. Now, a lot of people, when they tell you to check cheesecake, are like, look for a little jiggle. And I think that's really hard, especially for brand new bakers. It's hard to tell what's a tiny jiggle and what's a giant jiggle. So let me show you what that jiggle looks like. So you see how the center kind of wobbles. So that's what we're looking for, but it's kind of hard to tell when that's too wobbly or not wobbly enough. So I like to teach for you guys to take the internal temperature. So you're looking for about 165 degrees. Much more than that, and your cheesecake's gonna start to get really, really grainy, which is not very fun. So another thing that can cause your your cheesecake to crack is it cooling too quickly. So there's a couple of tricks that bakers will do. Sometimes bakers will keep their cheesecake in the oven and then turn it off and then let it cool slowly in the oven. I can't do that because I need to cook dinner, so I need the oven to stay on. But a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just leave it so it's still in the water bath. I'm going to leave it in the water bath. So it's going to help it, when it cools, it's going to cool really slowly. If we try to force it cool quickly, that's when you're going to get that splitting happening, and we don't want that. So we're going to let it cool slowly in the water bath, and when it's cool, I can take it out. And then once it's room temperature, I can move it into the refrigerator. Once it's been in the refrigerator and it's cold, I'm actually going to move it to the freezer, because just kind of like with our brownies and bars and things like that, cheesecake cuts much, much better when it's frozen. So I'm actually going to freeze this, and I won't be able to cut it until tomorrow. I just pulled this cheesecake out of the freezer. So last night I let it cool in the water bath, and then took it out and I put it in the fridge for a while. And then I moved it into the freezer when it's ready to go, so absolutely no cracking. I'm incredibly happy with that. So now it's frozen, and now I gotta get it out of this pan. So there's a couple ways that you can do that at home. Probably what you'll need to do is use a knife or baby offset spatula if you happen to have them, and put them in a really, really warm water, maybe even like boiling water. And then you're gonna run your knife around the edge. Me, I'm gonna use my favorite tool, because it's my favorite tool. If I have an excuse to use it, I'm gonna use it. And if we were in class, this is what we would use. So remember, we turn it on until we can hear it, click it on, and then we lower it a little bit. Now I have my cheesecake, bring it down a little bit, on a turntable so that I can move it around. So this is gonna gently warm up the sides of my springform pan, so I should be able to loosen it. And this can take a couple of passes before it works. I want to make sure I'm not melting my cake stand, because my cake stand is plastic. The ones that we have at school are metal, so it's a little safer to do this. I'm going to take a couple passes. And I can look and see. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlatch this very gently and kind of see if I can tell if it's starting to release on its own. I don't want to force anything. See, it's releasing a little bit. It's got a couple of areas where it's sticking. So I'm going to go again. Remember, you always want to keep that blowtorch moving. You don't want it to get too hot at any one particular spot. And usually around the latch can be a little hard to get through. Let's try that. Oh, where'd it go? There it is. All right. almost. It's like right about here. If I was doing this in a cake pan, I would torch the sides as well as the bottom to help release it. If you don't have a blowtorch at home, I'm not saying that you have to go out and buy one, but if you do, to release the bottom, you could actually put it on your burner on your stove. So either if you have gas or electric, whatever, that would all be hot enough to do that. All right, so I just released. So I'm actually gonna go down gently so I don't mess up my sides. No, cheesecake. You guys, I can't get over how golden this cheesecake is. I've never made anything that looks like this without, like, I don't know, adding some color. It's just really cool. It looks like it's a lemon cheesecake or a flavored cheesecake, but no, it's just the eggs from my brother's chicken, so I'm definitely going to share some of this with him. So this is still frozen, really, really hard. Remember I said it cuts better frozen. I'm actually going to wait a little bit because it's so thick. It can be really, really difficult to cut right now. So I'm going to set a timer for about 15 minutes. So it'll still be frozen, but it will have softened a little bit, and then I'll start to cut it. Actually, before I let it soften too much, I do want to take the cheesecake off of the base. So I'm going to take my offset spatula and kind of work it in there and try to get underneath where the parchment is, and that parchment's going to help release. So hopefully you can see. I didn't quite get underneath the parchment. Let me try again, because if we don't get underneath the parchment, what can happen is you can kind of break up the crust a little bit. Man, I'm striking out. Okay, so I did some finagling off camera, but I did get the bottom off. It's important to get the bottom off because you don't want to be cutting onto the metal, because if we cut into the metal, we can, one, scratch our pan, ruin our pan, but two, we can bring metal shards into our cake, which we don't want to do. So I'm going to let this sit for about 15 minutes, and then I will start to cut it. Okay, so it's been about 15 minutes. So my cheesecake is ready to cut. So I have a chef's knife ready. I also have a towel so that I can wipe my knife off between cuts. And usually, remember, we have like a big pitcher that we could put our knife in to kind of rinse it off. I don't really have a big enough pitcher that would work, but I'm right next to my sink, so I can just do that. So I'm actually going to have just the hot water kind of running. I realize it's not super for the environment. But first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to kind of mark where I want to cut. So I'm going to do just a very gentle line, because then I can always kind of change it if it's not exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to cut this cheesecake into 16s. So I just marked in half, and then I mark those halves in half. And even just doing that, I can get a little cheesecake on my knife, so I want to clean it off. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure if you can really see it. And then I'm going to mark those in half. Which should give me 8 nice even pieces. If I was doing this for a restaurant, like a plated dessert, I would cut these into 12s. So they're a little bit bigger slices. If I was doing this for a buffet, I would stick with the 16, because with a buffet, you kind of want smaller portions so people don't waste a lot of stuff. So I have 8 now, and then as I go, I'll cut each of those in half. I'm going to put my knife in at the center. And I'm just going to push down and pull out. I don't want to do any kind of sawing motion, because if I do, that's going to ruin my nice clean cut. I'll go again, and because it's still a little frozen, I am having to put a little bit of pressure to get through. And again, pull back. I actually have left the parchment on because it kind of helps the cheesecake stay in place instead of when I pull out, the slice doesn't want to come out because it's still a little attached to the parchment. I just need to remember to take it off. So if I kept going like this, I would get 8 slices. So I can go back to what I cut and then cut that in half. So it's kind of a smaller portion, which again for buffet would be great, and also, you know, for quarantine is definitely best, which is why I'm picking the smaller cut, because I'm trying to be as healthy as I can right now. I'm still so excited about this color, you guys. I'm so into this yellow gold. It's making me very happy. So, I should be able to sneak underneath the parchment. I didn't quite cut through, that's okay. Just take my knife back through. First slice is always the hardest slice to get out of a cake or a pie or anything. That's for sure. And there you go. So you can see it's a little bit of a smaller piece. So again, 12s would be totally acceptable. I worked with one of my assistant pastry chefs, would cut into 14. So this size cake into 14, which honestly is like the perfect slice. But if you could imagine, she had to cut in half, and then she'd have to cut into 7s because 7 is in odd numbers. You can't divide it in half. I don't know how she did it. Honestly, it was amazing. But every single time, they all came out even. For every other human being ever, that is incredibly hard. So I would stick with even numbers whenever you're going to cut stuff. So 12 or 16 is a really good cut for this size. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this demo. I will probably be making some toppings for my cheesecake later. So stay tuned, stay safe, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.